I'm Louise Ward, I'm the host of this episode of Made in New Zealand, where we talk to Kiwi musicians, artists and writers. And this week's guest is Kathryn Perks, who is the author of When I Die, a record of personal details and end-of-life planner. So this is going to be a fascinating one. But first question, tell us about yourself. Who's Kathryn Perks?
Morning, Louise.
Morning.
Is it Lou?
Yeah, either.
Okay.
When I'm being posh, I'm Louise.
Okay. I'm originally from Christchurch. I've been living in Hawke's Bay for the last 8 years. Before that, I was over 20 years living in Australia, so I always thought that I'd come back to live in New Zealand, and just a few family members here brought me back. So how all this came about was my mother was living in Christchurch, and my father had died some years ago. This was back about 2009. And she became ill, and the family were not living anywhere near Christchurch. I've got other family members in the North Island and one in Sydney. So we all had to leave our prospective homes and families, and I took leave from my job to come back to see her firstly, and then we were advised that her illness was terminal. So she had to pack up the house and move up to Hawke's Bay, or pack, 2 suitcases, to move to Hawke's Bay, where my sister cared for her for the last few months of her life. And then when she ultimately died, we all came to Hawke's Bay and had a funeral service, and then we decided to have a memorial service in Christchurch to honour her connections there. So we wanted the job done as quickly as we could, but it's a huge job if you've ever had to do it, and I had never had this experience before. So we all flew to Christchurch and started on the house, and of course it was all full of Dad's stuff as well as her own. Boxes of photos and books and everything, and
the whole life,
all the accumulation of stuff that we all get. So we decided just to get a skip in, and the easiest thing was to throw most of it in the skip, which we did. The local school fair was having a fair, which was very handy, and we put some things through auction, but as we all know, you don't get much in auction. So it was just huge, and she had been a fairly organised person. She told us where everything was in a bureau, and we thought, oh well, it's all sorted, we don't have to worry, she's got it all, because the type of person that she was. And then we started, and just didn't know where to start. It was a minefield, and just an accumulation of stuff that made no sense. And as we were going through her documents, it seemed that some names of the companies that she dealt with had changed, and we were just utterly confused. But among her stuff, I came across an article in the Christchurch Star that she'd torn out and kept, and she'd written on the top, "You might need this."
Oh.
And it was a picture of 2 women and all a story about them, how they'd set up a business in Christchurch of going through estates, clearing contents, and doing all the things that sort of to relieve the burden of somebody going through grief and having to do this. It's just overwhelming. So I thought, gee, what a great idea. There really needs to be somebody who'll just come in and do all this, because you just can't deal with the grief, and the administrative stuff as well is just huge. So I sort of kept in the back of my mind thinking, I might have more of a think about that at some stage. But anyway, then we got on with the job, and ultimately we were lucky. In a few weeks we had it all cleared and the house was sold. So it all came together pretty quickly. But and then we all went back to our homes, and I went back to Australia, and spent another, 10 years or something there. So that's how I came to start the book.
You saw a need?
I saw the need, and then I left it. Of course, I stayed in Aussie for, as I say, about 10 years, and then I came back in 2013 and just decided to... The idea was just perking away, and friends said, you should do something about that. I really think it's a great idea. I don't know anything about my parents, what they want or anything. So I thought, well, I'll do it when I find time. So when I moved back to New Zealand, and originally I went back to Christchurch, did a bit of house sitting there, and after the earthquake it was just all too sad. I didn't want to stay there. So I applied for a job up in Hawke's Bay where my sister was, and moved everything back from Australia just on the chance, and I got the job, just a part-time job. And I thought, well, I'll work on this through the winters, get me through the winters. So I did that for the next 3 years. I just picked away at, I thought about what I would need to write down. And because I'd lived in another country, I also thought I had to consider what, if other people had lived overseas, what life they would have had there. I mean, my family would know nothing about what I had, what bank accounts I've got, how to contact my friends when I die, you know, all of that. And so I thought, well, I'll have to also consider that. And it just went on and on and on about what I thought needed to be written down so that whoever was going through my own stuff would have an idea of, and just, I mean, otherwise my friends would never be told I died, or else my estate could be finalised without them knowing I had money overseas or any of that. So so I worked away on that, and people would come up with suggestions on what they thought should be put down, and ultimately in 2016 the first issue was printed. And of course, as soon as you print it, you think, should have put that in, and away it goes. And so over the years, it's kind of evolved and just been added to or tweaked slightly. And I was lucky enough to get the help of a local Hastings lawyer who went through it and just tweaked it slightly and made suggestions for how I might word things. And that was really, really helpful. And it just helped me get it to the stage that it is now. I've just had the 5th edition printed in the last couple of weeks. So just there. So that's really it's just evolved over the years, and I keep hoping this was going to be the last one. The one before that was available for at least 2 years, that edition, but I wanted to call it an end-of-life planner as well as a workbook, because it's a prompt for things you should consider, I think, for when you're writing down and preparing for end of life, and it just helps put everything in one place. Because when I was originally looking for similar books, when I first started putting the first draft together, I researched a lot online and looked at what was available in New Zealand and overseas, and I found there were quite a few in the UK and America, not much in New Zealand at all, and certainly what there was I didn't think it included enough, or what I thought should be included. So, but I got some ideas, and I also got some ideas of what not to include, and there were some reviews from people who found that what they'd seen or bought in the UK or America, whatever, wasn't clear English, it was hard to understand, it was too, I don't know, gobbledygook, and I wanted to make something that was fairly plain and easy. And I originally thought that the workbook was a good idea because it was right there, and you can put it's visible and a quick reference. There's plenty of suggestions online of what you should put in it, but no suggestions of where to put it, to put all the information. And so for me it was just easy to have something written down.
What about the content? So how did you... It's very well structured. So we have a guide to completion, reviews and updates that you've done in this latest one. So how did you decide what needed to go in? And tell us a little bit about the content.
Well, I will go through that. Again, it was just suggestion, what I thought that I'd need to for myself. This was originally put together for me. And then I thought, well, it might be helpful to other people. And when I showed it to friends, they said, I want one. So that's how it evolved. But the contents, well, just to go through it, there's a couple of pages right at the start which are like a summary of the rest of the book. And if you did nothing else and just completed those first 2 pages, then that would be super helpful to whoever's going through it. And that includes things like whether you've got a will, whether you want to be buried or cremated, who your lawyer is, and the most urgent things that your family are going to need to know. So it also has your personal identification details that are going to be needed for your death certificate, who your parents were and grandparents, so on. It also has whether you have a funeral plan and will, who to notify and how. That might be family, friends, or your lawyer, or any other legal professionals. Other professionals. What bank accounts you have. You might also be making regular payments. Everything needs to be stopped. Information on your KiwiSaver, if you have one. What income you have from investments or other business interests. Property ownership details.
Pets. I've just come across pets, and I just think, because within my marriage, there are certain things that are my responsibility, certain things that are Gareth's responsibility. So occasionally I'll say, that bank account, if you died, how would I know where, the details of that? I'd have to go through the chaos of your office and try and find it. So I'm just thinking, I need to fill this in really, really soon.
Well, with pets, I haven't gone too much into that other than to say who the vet is, because if somebody then takes over the care of your pet, then they'll want to continue. So I've tried to think of everything.
Adopt your pet,
exactly. But other than that, property ownership, what insurances you might have. You might have agreed to organ donation. There is a page for that. Your funeral plan, now your preference for how to dispose of your body. Again, in the early editions I didn't talk about embalming, but I have got a space there to say whether you want to be embalmed or not. I certainly don't want to be, but that's up to you to tick that box or not. What type of casket you want, the format of your funeral, or you might just want to have a memorial service. There's a space for messages for loved ones, and that could be given privately or in the book to be read out. You might have cultural or religious traditions and beliefs that should be observed. There's pages also to write about your life story. Often we go through life talking to our parents about where they've been, what they've done, and then they die and they think, oh, what did they say?
Stories? Yeah.
What were some of the things? And so there's about 4 pages there to write down some ideas just a bit about your life. There might be humorous events, or you might have been in the war, in the army, or somebody might have known somebody that had a relative in there, or anything. And then it can all be a handy reference for your family, be a nice reference to keep, or it can be read out at your funeral and by a family member, or it just gives the family something to go on. So there's also a part at the back for how you might want to distribute personal gifts and items that aren't included in your will. Your will always overrides what you write down, but there might be small trinkets or a cup and saucer from Auntie Joan or whoever that you might want to give to somebody, and there's just a space for that. If you have anything of huge value, then that needs to be recorded in your will, but this is for other stuff. I should say that the workbook was never designed to replace a will, it's just for everything else not included in your will.
It's
all the details.
Yeah.
And space for that.
I love the borrowed and loaned items.
Well, you never know when you're going to die. So if you've borrowed something or you've lent something to somebody, you write it down. The space in the book to write changes, so when it comes back, you can change.
Where the hell is my copy of Bob's Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
I know,
Who's got that?
Exactly. But you might, hopefully you know where it's gone.
Oh, I know.
But
exactly
there is space for that. There's also a space for social media accounts, just a one-pager. I haven't gone into too much detail on that. In the latest issue, I have put how to go into Facebook and make sure you've got what you want to have happen when you die to that Facebook account.
You can do that?
You can do that, yeah. But you've got to make it, now if you read that link, then you go in there and you go to your account and you can click a box and say what you want to have happen.
Of course, not many people know about that.
I know. So there is that option to do that. Keep in mind also, though, that people are going to have to know passwords sometimes for all of this. And I haven't gone, there's nothing in the book that's private in there. It's bank accounts are just where they are. There's no bank account numbers. There's no passwords. What I suggest with passwords is writing them in a separate book, telling your family where that book is kept. And they may or may not be able to get into your computer, but it gives at least something to go on that they might be able to close some accounts personally. Otherwise, Facebook need a death certificate and all of this other stuff, and if you can get around that, then that would
absolutely anything that you can do to make it a bit easier in that time of grief, you know.
I know. So then there's just a few extra pages at the back of just to write anything else you might have that I haven't covered that. I'd like to know what it is.
Yeah, well, that's it.
I've tried to think of everything.
Well, we talked about that just off air, just before we came on air. The things that wake you at 2 a.m.
Well, yeah. I mean, because I wanted to call the book an end of life planner, I had to give it a new ISBN. So I thought, well, I'll go back through it and just make sure there's nothing that I've left out. I just tweaked the grammar a wee bit and changed it slightly. But yes, before that was due to come out, or when I was working on the draft, I awoke in the middle of the night thinking, what about online investments? That a lot of New Zealanders have shares, online shares, like in Sharesies, and you can invest as little as $500 or $500,000 with them, but it needs to be written down. So I thought, oh gosh, I'll have to have a page on that. So I emailed Sharesies and asked them what their process is for when somebody dies, and they said, oh well, it has to be written in your will. I thought, I bet people haven't.
No, I bet they haven't. Yeah.
So I tweaked another income page and tried to include that, and because I've heard stories of where people have had shares and years after the estate's been finalised, $40,000 or $50,000 being discovered, and it's
Get it in the book, people. Get it in the book.
Well, get it in the book, or tell your lawyer. I mean, people have got to have a will. I can't stress that strongly enough, and so many don't. But you need a will, and then also fill out the planner, and just then all you've got to do is say to your lawyer, look, everything you're going to need to know is in this book. It's in When I Die, and there might be parts that are in there that he might make a note of and include in your will, or he or she.
It's important that your family knows where the book is as well.
Well, that's the other thing. You've really just got to fill it out and then say to your family, I've done everything you need to know. We don't even have to have the discussion. Everything you need to know is in When I Die, and it's in that drawer there.
Yeah, yeah.
So when the time comes, they just know where they've got to go.
I think that's just brilliant. So we've covered quite a lot of the questions, I think, without me having to ask them, which is marvellous. That's the way an interview should go. I'm really interested in the death side of it and people's willingness to discuss death, because my mother has always found it incredibly morbid, and before she lost her marbles completely, bless her, she's still with us, but not able to tell me what she wants. She always used to say, oh, just do what you want, and I found that quite the responsibility. So that was her reaction to talking about death. So what have you found? Do some people sort of go, oh no, I can't do that?
Absolutely. I've found mostly people who are older, maybe in their 70s or 80s, are quite open to talking about it. They seem to have they're prepared, they've talked to their spouse, they each of them know what the other one wants, and that's really good when you've got a partner. There are a lot of people on their own. They don't really know who they can tell, and they don't really care. So I certainly have found it's like a wall goes up a lot of the time, and people don't want to talk about it. But then I get other people who might be in their 40s or 50s who see their parents getting older, and they think, gee, I don't know anything about what mum and dad want, but they won't talk about it. And they've tried to bring up the topic, and it's just, they're just shut down, and oh, I don't want to know, I've got nothing, who cares, I don't care what happens to it.
Well, you don't care because you'll be dead.
Exactly.
But what about me that's got to sort it all out?
It's got to come back on a saying, well, that's okay, but how would you feel if I died suddenly? Do you know all my information? Do you know where I've kept things? Do you know who my friends are? Do you know who to contact? Do you know what money I've got, or where my bank accounts are? And I'll bet they think,
no idea.
Okay. And as I say, they don't need to actually, even if you were to say, well, look, if you won't talk about it, would you at least fill out an end-of-life planner? And just let me know where it is, and then job done.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just going to be so much uncertainty when the time comes, and the family will just be arguing, and they may be arguing, sometimes they'll agree, but the planner just gives everybody a guide, if you like. I mean, they may choose not to honour your wishes, but at least they can then say, well, this is what Mum said she wants, so let's try and do what she wants. Or not, but it's just something to go on, and it just means that they don't have to spend time wading through documents and trying to make sense of what's current or what's not. And as I say, there's space in the planner to update, or if you make changes or what's changed, and you might have an investment with somebody that you've no longer got, so you can go in and say, I've not got this anymore, or whatever. So keep it updated, and it will be a valuable resource and reference point for the family. And just think about what your family will have to go through, because it is not a pleasant experience, probably the worst experience I've ever had.
I think it is. You don't expect to have to do it, do you?
No,
nobody talks about it. Nobody
well, they
warns
don't.
You. Yeah,
but it'd be good if you could, prompt your family just and say, look, I think we need to all sit down and talk about this. And while we're here, this is what I want.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes left, and I just really want to talk about why don't, on a philosophical level almost, why don't people confront death? Why don't we talk about it?
I've researched it online. I can't. It's just not part of the way we're not brought up talking about death. It's never something that's really discussed. Some families are lucky enough to be open about, and they like to let their family know what they're thinking, but it's like a real taboo subject. And
are we talking really about sort of Western cultures, like white European cultures? Because I know...
Yeah, I haven't had much experience with it, to be honest, with other countries, but...
there are some cultures that will dig up their dead on birthdays and Christmas and get them out, and there's still a part... There was a whole issue of New Philosopher on this, and it was fascinating. You're like, okay... Now I've got over my initial shock. That's actually really quite cool, because they never then really leave you, and that's a normal thing to them. But that would be horrendous to some people. Awful. Yeah.
And funeral services and formats are changing all the time, becoming less and less that you really need. And some people don't even have a funeral. Yeah. But it's nice to be able to write down what you do want, or not. So whether you might want an elaborate one or nothing at all, or you might want your ashes scattered, or whatever you want, but just write it down so people know what your preferences are.
Clear. So obviously this book is available at Wardini Books, but where else have you been selling it?
Well, it's also for sale at Age Concern in Hastings. You can email me online. There's a When I Die site, www.whenidie.co.nz, for more information. There's also samples of the book. There's also an international version, which is a generic one, which has all references to New Zealand removed on that. So go to their website, and there's contact information there.
That's great. And any further plans?
Not at this stage, just to spend this year trying to get it more out there, and I've got a few talks lined up and so on, so
excellent.
Just letting people know that they should really consider it.
So if people want to contact you, go to the website?
Yes, they can, or they can email me whenidie.info@gmail.com as well.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really useful for many, many people. So thanks ever so much,
Thanks,
Kathryn,
Lou.
for joining us today.
Pleasure.
You've been listening to Made in New Zealand on Radio Kidnappers, the voice of Hawke's Bay.